Thank you so much. This is such a great honor.
Perhaps the most famous are these of fairies in a Yorkshire glen.
I'm very, very pleased to announce that the first baby clone is born.
The company is called Hunting for Bambi.
Hi, Walter. I was at the mall today, and guess what happened?
I bet you thought that I'd forgotten all about this series. You know, considering the fact that the last installment was in February 2022. That is absolutely insane. I cannot believe that it's been that long, but alas, here we are. I remembered it existed and I'm back to finish the bloody job. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Emily and on this channel I make videos and documentaries on all things strange, usually taking a deep dive into fringe history and bizarre stories. In the interest of time, this video won't be as deep a dive as usual, but I'm still going to try and bring some of the more weird and unknown parts of these stories to life. This is the infamous Hoaxes Iceberg, as created by Silent Chatter on Reddit. And we're on tier 5. And let me tell you, this tier has it all. We've got a UFO cult, fake alien pictures, theosophical fairies, and satanic rituals at CERN. So, without further ado, let's fucking go. This series is brought to you by viewer support on Patreon. You can sign up for as little as £1 a month, which gives you early access to videos and helps to fund the research and creation of these documentaries. Go to the link in the description or the pinned comment and sign up today. Edgar Allan Poe is mostly known for being a gothic horror writer, spinning mysterious tales of the macabre and supernatural. But he was also one of the fathers of modern science fiction, thanks to his short story, The Unparalleled Adventure of One Hans Phaal. It was written as if it was real, and it told the story of how Hans had managed to travel to the moon in a balloon. We're already rhyming, we're off to a brilliant start. In the story, Hans said that it took him a remarkably speedy 19 days to get there, and he writes that he has much to say of the people themselves, of their manners, customs, and political institutions, of their peculiar physical construction, of their ugliness, of their want of ears. But he also won't tell anyone about these strange-looking people on the moon until he's pardoned for murdering people here on Earth. Now that's one way to get away with murder. Also, he writes about these people on the moon in such a mean way. I'm sure they don't look as bad as he says. The story was published by the Southern Literary Messenger in June 1835, just over 50 years after the first ever balloon flight that took place in France, which contained a sheep, a duck, and a rooster. The marvels of balloon flight were obviously a strong influence on Poe and his story. In Geoffrey Meyer's book, Edgar Allan Poe, His Life and Legacy, John Latrobe, one of the judges in a competition that launched Poe's career, is quoted as saying the following about Poe's work on the story. I asked him whether he was then occupied with any literary labour. He replied that he was engaged on a voyage to the moon, and at once went into a somewhat learned disquisition upon the laws of gravity, the height of the Earth's atmosphere, and the capacities of balloons, warming in his speech as he proceeded. Edgar Allan Poe had planned a sequel to the story, even going so far as to mention it in the original text, but unfortunately it never appeared. Although the story was published as if it was a real account, I'm not sure that anyone actually took it seriously. But the story of Hans Phaal made its mark on science fiction writers like Jules Verne, who was the first to claim that Poe was the forerunner of science fiction. And it also made its mark on the next entry on this chart, which came along just 2 months after the publication of Poe's story of a remarkable voyage to the moon. What would you do if you're living your life in 1835, you know, you're just chilling, you pick up the newspaper and you read a strange story about how famed astronomer Sir John Herschel has discovered 4-foot bat-winged humanoids and temples on the moon? No, but seriously, like, what would you do? It's 1835. You can't call up your mate. You can't get on Twitter and start pumping out hot takes about whether the bat-winged humanoids are hostile or not. You'd literally just have to sit there and be like, all right, guess this is my life now. The Great Moon Hoax was a series of 6 articles that were released in August 1835 in the Sun newspaper. The story was wild, but it was given multiple touches of believability. First of all, the findings were attributed attributed to Sir John Herschel, and The Sun also claimed that the series was taken from the supplement to the Edinburgh Journal of Science. To readers, that would have sounded kind of believable, despite being complete fiction. The articles got more and more weird as they went on. At first, the astronomers claimed to see pyramids, a beach, and certain animals, and then they started to see 4-foot-tall man-bats flying around, described as innocent and happy creatures. Juxtaposed to this were another race of beings that lived in an area called the Vale of the Triads, which were described as being in larger stature than the former specimens, less dark in colour, and in every respect an improved variety of the race. Honestly, every time you think, this can't have any racism in it, and boom, there it is. In his article, Moonshot, Race, a Hoax and the Birth of Fake News, Kevin Young writes, most subsequent accounts of the hoax fail to mention the Vale dwellers, that superior lighter race, perhaps because those beings make clear that race and racialism have plenty to do with the hoax and its success. When I tell you that this series was popular, I mean it was popular. The papers kept selling out and people wanted to know everything there was to know about what the hell was going on the moon. The moon hoax's popularity certainly owed much to its recreating on the moon what many white readers believed could be found at home. There, on the other end of a telescope, wasn't just life but order, not just extinct craters but vibrant temples, not just sustenance but subordination, not just humanoids but hierarchies. To meet the rising demand, the stories were published in a pamphlet which also sold like hotcakes. And that wasn't all. We also got some solid artwork produced to really drive home the existence of a human bat colony up there among the stars. But here's an important question. Who the bloody hell came up with this story in the first place? The series was written by Richard Adams Locke, who before turning his pen to literary hoaxes, wrote crime stories for The Sun, which were described as a little too gorgeous and florid in their descriptions of police scenes. He was incredibly successful and eventually became the paper's editor. When writing what would later become known as the Great Moon Hoax, he claimed to have been influenced by two articles, one published in 1826 in the Edinburgh New Philosophical Journal, titled The Moon and Its Inhabitants, and the other published in 1824 by a German astronomer named Franz von Paula Gruthausen. Both of these articles speculated about creatures living on the moon and the existence of large structures that would denote some kind of civilization. Move aside Richard C. Hoagland, we are dealing with the OGs. To Edgar Allan Poe, however, Locke's influences appeared closer to home. He was pretty much convinced that the story was a rip-off of Hans Pfaall. He's quoted as saying, "Have you seen the discoveries in the moon? Do you not think it altogether suggested by Hans Pfaall? It is very singular, but when I first purposed writing a tale concerning the moon, the idea of telescopic discoveries suggested itself to me, but I afterwards abandoned it. I had, however, spoken of it freely, and from many little incidents and apparently trivial remarks in those discoveries, I am convinced that the idea was stolen from myself." However, Poe would also take inspiration from the moon hoax less than 10 years later, publishing his balloon hoax in the very same newspaper. Anyway, there's a lot more to this story, and writer Matthew Goodman goes into all the details in his book, The Sun and the Moon. So if you want to know more, then give that one a read. And I'm sorry to say that as far as we know, the moon doesn't have a colony of bat boys on it. It's just kind of filled up with human-made space junk. Well, if you think we've been there, that is. I'm really going to have to hold myself back from doing a deep dive on this one because there is so much that connects this story to theosophy. And if you've been on this channel before, then you'll know that I talk about theosophy and Elena Blavatsky in almost every video, except for maybe the UFO series. But trust me, she will appear there too eventually. At some point, I might decide to do something larger on this story, but for now, here are the basic details. When they were questioned, Frances was steadfast in her answer. They'd been playing with the fairies. Obviously, Obviously, their parents were like, whatever, of course you were, and they were getting annoyed with all the bloody dirt being traipsed around the house. Eventually, when they wouldn't shut up about these bloody fairies, Elsie's father Arthur gave her a camera and was like, go on then, take a picture of them if they exist. See, Arthur was a photographer himself. He had a darkroom in their house. So when the girls came back from the stream and said that they'd managed to photograph the fairies, Arthur was obviously beacon. And Arthur wasn't convinced at first. He thought that they were cardboard cutouts, that the girls just had overactive imaginations. However, a couple of months later, the girls borrowed the camera again and took another photograph, this time showing Elsie interacting with a fairy while sitting down. In 1918, Frances sent a postcard to her friend Joanna Parvin in South Africa, which read,
Elsie and I are very friendly with the Beck fairies. It's funny, I never used to see them in Africa. It must be too hot for them there.
Again, you could argue that this postcard, combined with the photographs, was the product of an overactive imagination or a pre-planned hoax. Or you could become a Cottingley Fairies truther and insist that Frances wouldn't lie to her dear friend. While Arthur may have dismissed the photographs out of hand, Elsie's mother Polly fell hook, line and sinker, and this is where our good friends the Theosophists join the story. In 1919, just a few years after the initial photographs were taken, Polly attended a local meeting of the Theosophical Society in Bradford. Now, if you've never been on my channel before and you're like, what the hell is Theosophy all about, then I'd recommend watching my video on Elena Blavatsky when you've got a chance. But here's an extremely crude and extremely brief explainer. Theosophy was officially born in 1875 and blends the words theos, meaning God, and Sophia, meaning wisdom. The stated aim of Theosophy was to blend science with spirituality and the occult, and they're known by their motto, there is no religion higher than the truth. Within Theosophy, there are adepts, also known as masters. These are individuals that have reached a much higher level of knowledge than the rest of us. They want to help humanity and guide us in our spiritual evolution. This idea of spiritual evolution is what brings Theosophy into the Cottingley story. Blavatsky referred to beings like fairies as elementals or nature spirits, and she wrote,
They are the soul of the elements, the capricious forces in nature, acting under one immutable law, inherent in these centres of force, with undeveloped consciousness and bodies of plastic mould, which can be shaped according to the conscious or unconscious will of the human being who puts himself en rapport with them. These beings have never been, but will in myriads of ages hence, be evolved into men. They belong to the 3 lower kingdoms.
The meeting that Polly attended just so happened to be on the topic of these elemental beings, and she came armed with the photographs. You can imagine that they caused quite a stir, and they were shown later that year at a Theosophical conference, which was attended by Edward Gardiner. At the time, he was the General Secretary for the English section of the Theosophical Society, and was referred to as the English Sage. The fairy photographs caught his attention. He took one look at them and was like, oh my god, Blavatsky was right. Here's the proof of humanity's evolution into a higher dimension.
The fact that 2 young girls had not only been able to see fairies, which others had done, but had actually for the first time ever been able to materialise them at a density sufficient for their images to be recorded on a photographic plate, meant that it was possible that the next cycle of evolution was underway.
Edward then sent the prints to a so-called photography expert called Harold Snelling, and he was like, yeah, I kind of think they might be legit. In the meantime, Arthur Conan Doyle, who was famously into spiritualism, had found out about the photographs from the editor of the spiritualist publication called Light. He was so interested in the story that he began to write an article on the existence of fairies, and he contacted Edward in 1920 to get his expert opinion too. The family eventually gave him permission to use the photographs in his article, allegedly refusing any sort of payment for them. Arthur Conan Doyle and Edward Gardiner knew that they needed to get some expert opinions for people to actually start believing in the existence of fairies. So they began approaching other photographers and photography experts, and they ended up approaching Kodak. And they were like, these photographs haven't necessarily been doctored, but we also can't prove prove that the fairies are real. Now please leave us alone. They also approached Ilford for an opinion, and they said that there was some evidence of faking. Doyle also approached Sir Oliver Lodge, who also believed that the photographs may have been faked. Edward Gardiner went to stay with the family at the end of July 1920. I went off to Cottingley again, taking the 2 cameras and plates from London, and met the family and explained to the 2 girls the simple working of the cameras, giving 1 each to keep. The cameras were loaded, and my final advice was that they need to go up to the glen only on fine days, as they had been accustomed to do before, and tice the fairies, as they called their way of attracting them, and to see what they could get. I suggested only the most obvious and easy precautions about lighting and distance, for I knew it was essential that they should feel free and unhampered and have no burden of responsibility. If nothing came of it at all, I told them, they were not to mind a bit. Francis and Elsie kept saying, oh, the fairies won't show up with so many people around. So everyone leaves and the girls start to take their photographs, and lo and behold, the fairies show up in 2 of them. They send the negative plates back to Edward, who's like, oh my God, there they are. I knew they were real. And he sends a letter off to Arthur Conan Doyle, who was in Australia at the time.
My heart was gladdened when out here in far Australia I had your note and the 3 wonderful pictures which are confirmatory of our published results. When our fairies are admitted, other psychic phenomena will find a more ready acceptance. We have had continued messages at seances for some time that a visible sign was coming through.
Now this guy was a Cottingley truther. Fast forward to December 1920 and Arthur Conan Doyle releases his article on the Cottingley Fairies in a magazine called The Strand. I just love how much these people want to believe, because I'm looking at these photographs and thinking, they look like cutouts. But I guess back in the 20s they could have fooled people. And they obviously did. Doyle's article was so popular that the magazine sold out. People were loving it. They were like, oh my God, fairies exist. And honestly, I don't blame them. There's that little part of me that wants to believe too. The photographs are so enchanting and magical. They encapsulate a sense of childlike wonder and adventure that makes them incredibly appealing. But not to some hard-nosed skeptics who, some would say, have 0 sense of childlike wonder. I've got a love-hate relationship with skeptics, alright, despite the fact that I technically am one. Sometimes it's okay to let people believe in magical creatures. Although I guess in this case we're dealing with the Theosophical Society, so they're trying to debunk the existence of the fairies left, right and centre. But Doyle and Gardiner stand by their claims that the fairies are real. And Doyle publishes another article in The Strand in 1921 with the latest photographs that the girls had taken. And he also published a book in 1922 titled The Coming of the Fairies. In August 1921, Edward Gardiner visited Cottingley again, this time bringing the theosophist and occultist Geoffrey Hodson with him. And this guy was a true believer. Despite the fact that Francis and Elsie said that the fairies weren't there and no photographs were taken, Hodson claimed to see fairies everywhere, and he ended up writing a couple of books on them. I am personally convinced of the bona fides of the 2 girls who took these photographs. I spent some weeks with them and their family, and became assured of the genuineness of their clairvoyance of the presence of fairies, exactly like those photographed, in the glen at Cottingley, and of the complete honesty of all parties concerned. In 1983, Francis and Elsie, both in the last years of their life, decided to confess all to a journalist named Joe Cooper, who was writing a piece on the story for a magazine named The Unexplained. Francis said about the first photograph, "My heart always sinks when I look at it, when I think of how it's gone all around the world. I don't see how people could believe they're real fairies. I could see the backs of them and the hat pins when the photo was being taken." However, the photographs may have been faked, but these elemental beings by the stream were, according to Francis, very much real. Even in the last years of her life, she claimed that she had been drawn to the stream because of all of the fairy life that she had seen there. When Francis had blurted out that they'd been playing with the fairies and had been somewhat mocked by the adults, Elsie was like, you know what? I'm going to bloody show you.
Elsie had never even thought of it being a fraud. It was just Elsie and I having a bit of fun.
Just imagine, you're trying to get a bit of revenge on your fairy debunking parents. Trying to be like, you keep telling me these fairies aren't real, I'm going to bloody show you. And then all of a sudden you've got Arthur Conan Doyle and half of the English Theosophical Society digging around your back garden. Back in the early days of the internet, long before gamers live streamed their rooms being cleaned to thousands, and genocide became something that you could use to battle other TikTokers over for clout, two alleged 18-year-olds that looked remarkably like much older professional models went viral for planning to stream their first sexual encounter live on the internet. Their names were Mike and Diane, and they were going to allow the public to watch them do the business live on the internet at 9 p.m. on August 4th, 1998. The website OurFirstTime.com appeared in mid-1998. It had been set up by a man named Oscar Wells, who appeared to be working with the couple. But according to a piece by journalist Judith Lewis, most people had heard about the website via a chain email that was supposedly trying to drum up support to shut the website down. The site itself had been sponsored by the infamous Internet Entertainment Group, well known for distributing the Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee video, and they'd sponsored it in exchange for links to their content. They soon pulled out of the deal, claiming that they had been taken in by a hoax created by a man named Ken Tipton, who it turned out was the real creator of the website, not Oscar Wells, which was a fake name that he had used in reference to Orson Welles. The plan had been to dupe the public into paying $5 for access to the stream. However, the stream was going to show zero sex whatsoever. It was then also revealed that Mike and Diane were actors Michelle Palmer and Ty Taylor, and Tipton had apparently masterminded the entire operation to get back at the religious right, as well as trying to get a little rich in the process. It's April 1st, 1957, and people across the UK are tuned into the BBC's current affairs programme Panorama. Considering the fact that it was April Fool's Day, they should have been on the lookout for hoaxes, but I'm not sure if anyone watching was expecting a hoax like the next entry on this iceberg, opening like a seemingly normal report on an early spring.
It isn't only in Britain that spring this year has taken everyone by surprise.
The segment quickly spiralled into absolute nonsense.
Most important of all, it's resulted in an exceptionally heavy spaghetti crop. The last 2 weeks of March are an anxious time for the spaghetti farmer. There's always the chance of a late frost, which, while not entirely ruining the crop, generally impairs the flavour and makes it difficult for him to obtain top prices in world markets.
The concept of this spaghetti hoax was dreamed up by one of the cameramen for Panorama named Charles Yeager.
Charles de Yeager, who was a freelance cameraman, came into the office and they pitched the idea of the spaghetti harvest being an April Fool's joke. I gave Charles a budget of £100 and sent him off.
The idea of anyone being fooled by crude shots of spaghetti literally growing on trees seems pretty bonkers now, but apparently the BBC received tons of telephone calls. Many people point to the fact that spaghetti was a relatively new food in the UK at the time. We were scoffing down Yorkshire puddings, jam, roly-poly and roast meat, and I'm not knocking any of those. I'm just saying that spaghetti was very fancy at the time. My mum talks to me about when she discovered pesto in the 90s like it was this huge thing. Food in the UK was barren, desolate lands, and in many ways it still is. Anyway, because the British people weren't that used to spaghetti, people took to the phones and demanded an explanation. The BBC put out somewhat of a retraction, and most people found the hoax to be incredibly amusing. It had quite a long-lasting legacy too. It was shown in the US by Johnny Carson, and the spaghetti company San Giorgio did their own versions in 1978.
It's harvest time at the San Giorgio Spaghetti Farm, where San Giorgio grows the world's tastiest spaghetti.
What if I told you that scientists at the European Organisation for Nuclear Research were actually involved in horrifying satanic rituals involving human sacrifice, as well as using the Large Hadron Collider to open up a portal directly to hell? Let's have a little look at the evidence, shall we? To me, this video has all the hallmarks of a low-budget found footage horror movie. But it won't take you long to find someone online that actually believes that this video is showing an occult ritual at CERN. I mean, I guarantee, give it enough time, there'll be someone in the comments eventually yelling at me about it. So let's take a closer look at the footage. We've got 7 cloaked figures, and one of them, I assume, is the ringleader. Now, this lad must be pretty tall because unfortunately, he couldn't find a cloak long enough to reach the floor. I mean, seriously, we have got an ankle swinger situation going on here. Incredibly embarrassing, but anyway, I digress. We've also got what appears to be a woman, and at first she appears cloaked and then is revealed to be wearing what I assume is a white dress. Presumably, she is to be the sacrifice. At this point, the ankle swinging robe lad mutters something to the rest of them, and suddenly they're all kneeling. And the woman lays down. And it almost looks like she's lying in some kind of incredibly shallow grave, but that could be a trick of the light or the shadows. It's very hard to tell. Now, ankle swinger, sorry, I keep calling him that, but I'm just trying to differentiate, has something in his hand, presumably a knife. He moves towards her and appears to, well, stab her, basically. But it looks so bloody fake that stabbing feels like a bit of a stretch. He basically just jabs her with something. Whoever is filming the video takes that moment to literally shit themselves. The video goes all wobbly for a minute and then we're done. Now, this whole video takes place in front of a 2-meter high statue of the Hindu deity Lord Shiva, which was given to CERN by India. And on their website, they say that the belief is that Lord Shiva danced the universe into existence, motivates it, and will eventually extinguish it. Although I believe that the video doesn't show an actual human sacrifice, it definitely takes place on the CERN campus, and they were forced to comment on it, saying that CERN does not condone this type of spoof, which can give rise to misunderstandings about the scientific nature of our work. So the official explanation is that this was filmed as a hoax by people that possibly worked at CERN, as a response to some of the outlandish conspiracy theories floating around about the Large Hadron Collider. One of the wildest of these, as I mentioned previously, is this idea that CERN wants to create a portal to hell, potentially summoning demons here to further understand the God particle, aka the Higgs boson. And I mean, look at this stuff. It kind of does look terrifying, so I don't necessarily blame people for getting freaked out by it. It also makes you wonder why scientists and staff at CERN, already the subject of multiple conspiracies, would want to throw fuel on the fire by filming something like this and putting it out into a world that already thinks that they're hella sus. I understand that they're like just having a laugh and they're trying to parody it, but at some point you're just making everything worse. And if you want my opinion, my personal opinion, I feel like if you're going to such lengths to do a human sacrifice on the grounds at CERN, you would at least get yourself a robe that went down to your bloody ankles. Come on, it's like unbelievable. If I was him, I'd be embarrassed. That's all I'm saying.
Say goodbye to Hollywood. Say goodbye, my baby.
Finally, time for something a little more light-hearted, but not for the star at the centre of this bizarre rumour. And to be clear, that's exactly what this one is. It's not really a hoax. She may be an incredibly familiar face now, but back in the early 90s, Marisa Tomei was at the beginning of a long and illustrious career in the movie business. And in 1993, she surprised everyone by winning an Oscar for her critically acclaimed performance in the film My Cousin Vinny.
Thank you so much. This is such a great honor to receive this in this year when we recognize and celebrate and honor women.
Visibly excited and seemingly on top of the world, Tomei had no idea that her surprising win would come to be overshadowed by a vicious and orchestrated rumour. Whispers of a huge mistake began to take hold in Hollywood circles. People claimed that the real winner was actually Vanessa Redgrave, and that the only reason Tomei's name had been called was because Jack Palance got all muddled up. Various versions of the rumour began to circulate. Some say that Jack was pissed up.
I'm here to present the first award of the evening. The category is Best Actress in a Supporting Role.
Others say that he read off a teleprompter and not the envelope. But in each of these versions, Tomei's win was made out to be illegitimate. For anyone who had actually watched the ceremony, these rumours were obviously fake. Palance clearly looked down at the envelope and announced Marisa's name. And for anyone familiar with the Academy's protocol when it comes to the possibility of an incorrect name being read out, the rumours would have sounded downright ludicrous. There's actually 2 officials on standby at every Oscars ceremony just in case the wrong person gets announced. If it happens, they then strut onto the stage and put the whole thing right, something they had apparently failed to do in this case. So that brings us to the most pressing question. Who on earth made up this nasty rumour? According to early reports, it was spread by the former son-in-law of an Academy Award winner, but by the late 90s it was being spread around by the particularly nasty film critic and all-round bad vibes giver Rex Reed. The Academy ended up putting out a statement calling the whole thing nonsense, and many people told Rex Reed to apologise, although I'm not sure that he ever did. He definitely didn't make the rumour up, or at least I don't think he did, and the originator of the rumour has never been revealed. And I think there's an important lesson to be learned in this story. Don't trust anyone in Hollywood. They'll stab you in the back as soon as look at you. I really don't want to dwell on this one, so forgive me for being brief. Obviously, iceberg charts are huge online, and some of the most popular charts are ones around disturbing media. This entry refers to the Disturbing Movies iceberg. To give you a glimpse of how popular this is, one of the biggest creators on YouTube has a video on it that has 11 million views. Now, some people claim that some of the videos included on this Disturbing Movies iceberg are actually illegal and contain horrific things that I don't even want to think about. Other people claim that all of the footage on this iceberg is somehow legal and that these are just rumours designed to make things more sensational. Anyway, I'm so sorry. I won't be looking into it more because I value my mental health and I've got no interest in watching or researching anything on the bottom of that iceberg chart. Let's move on. This next one is named after Mariana's Trench, which is the deepest oceanic trench on Earth. According to some, Mariana's Web is the deepest, darkest part of the internet that you access via solving an advanced programming language. This theory of a secret hidden part of the dark web originated in an iceberg chart which claims all sorts of nonsense and contains multiple spelling errors, and some people claim that it originated on 4chan. Another delightful entry on this iceberg is the video "Hi Walter, I got a new girlfriend today." And why don't we just watch it?
Hi Walter, I was at the mall today and guess what happened? I met the most wonderful girl. I know she hates cameras, Walter, but I'm gonna show you her anyways. You ready?
Lovely. The things I have to watch to put these videos together, I swear to God. Fret not, it is entirely fake. In my opinion, quite obviously so, but here's where things take a more macabre turn. Back in 2009, a young girl named Kayla Berg went missing, and she still hasn't been found to this day. Some people claimed that the woman in the video looked like her. They began to try and investigate who exactly was behind the video, and eventually her mother was made aware of these rumours.
I looked at it and I about fell over. I was sick to my stomach. I watched it. I would stop it. I would pause it. I would break it down. And man, it sure did look like her. It looked like her face. It looked like her frame. The voice sounded like hers.
You thought this was your daughter?
I sincerely, honestly thought that was my daughter in that video.
And I can't even imagine what that must have been like for her mother to have to deal with. What was clearly supposed to be a short horror skit uploaded to YouTube was suddenly at the centre of a missing persons investigation. The police got involved and soon determined that the entire thing was a hoax. It's important to note here that the film creators had zero intention of trying to fool anyone into thinking that the woman in the video was Kayla, and it appears that the whole thing was just a tragic misunderstanding. The creator actually said that this was to be the first video in a series, and at the time YouTube was filled with found footage style horror videos and ARGs, and he blamed the media and internet sleuths for blowing the entire thing out of proportion. On December 13th, 1973, Claude Vorelhon, a man who had previously owned a car magazine called Autopop, as well as being a musician as a young man, claimed to have a strange experience with so-called extraterrestrial entities.
The ship was manned by the Elohim, a race from a distant planet who, as part of an exotic experiment, had created mankind in its own image millions of years ago. The creature went on to say that he was Vorelon's true father and gave him a new name, Rael, the messenger. Did they give you a mission to accomplish in the world?
Yes, the mission is the one that I'm doing now. That is, to bring revelation, to bring light to all men who used to believe either that they were created by a material god, or else that life was born by chance from a drop of water. But in fact, we were created by people like us. We were created in the laboratory by genetic manipulation, just as we're able to do now. My mission in life is to build an embassy where we'll be able to welcome them, where there will be diplomatic immunity, where we'll be able to greet them on Earth.
Before I get into the story, I just want to shout out one of my favourite channels on YouTube, which is Anomaly Documentaries. And they have an entire documentary about this human cloning story, where they go into a lot more detail than I'm going to here, because as I said at the beginning, this is just a kind of brief look. In 1997, the Raelians began pursuing human cloning, claiming that such efforts could unlock the secret of immortality, and this was in line with their beliefs that aliens had created all life on Earth.
They came on the Earth, built big laboratories, and inside these laboratories, through DNA and cloning, they did create all life on Earth.
They founded a company called Clonaid with Brigitte Bosselier serving as their chief executive. She had studied chemistry and received 2 PhDs before finding Rael and his strange religion in the early 90s.
Was there ever a time when you thought, I'm not sure if this is the right thing to do?
The only concern I have regarding this is, am I doing it right? In terms of science.
They hit the news in the early 2000s when they claimed that they were being financed by an American couple whose 10-month-old child had died. They were going to clone her for the sum of $1.5 million. This claim got their laboratory in West Virginia raided by the FDA, and it was revealed that a man named Mark Hunt, an unfortunate name, had bought the equipment because he wanted Clonaid to clone his deceased son. By April 2001, they were claiming that a woman was to be impregnated with a cloned fetus, and it was on December 27th, 2002 that Brigitte Bosselier finally announced the birth of the first human clone.
I'm very, very pleased to announce that the first baby clone is born. She was born yesterday at 11:55 a.m. in the country where she was born. So this will not give you more details about the location. She's fine. We call her Eve between us. You knew that, of course. Some suggested it, and I thought it was a good idea, actually. You won't have the right name. And, you know, for a long time, I thought that this press conference will be with the baby, the parents, the scientists, everybody surrounding me, and having pleasure announcing it. I'm alone. And there is a reason to that, is that it hasn't been easy to face the world with this announcement. And we have been discussing with the parents the last 3 months how we would handle today. And they decided not to show up yet.
Obviously, people were like, what the bloody hell is going on? A cloned baby named Eve? You gotta be joking. They didn't actually present any evidence of the existence of such a child, but obviously there were huge safeguarding concerns. There were petitions to appoint Eve a temporary guardian, and a court case ensued where it was revealed that the baby was supposedly born outside of the US and was currently living in Israel. No proof of baby Eve existing was ever provided, although that didn't stop Brigitte and other Raelian spokespeople from claiming that multiple clones had been born. Throughout the early 2000s, these babies were being cloned left, right and centre. But again, no proof of them existing has ever been shown to the world. At some point I'd like to explore the Raelians in a lot more detail, but for now, again, I'd point in the direction of anomaly documentaries if you want a deeper dive on this incredibly bizarre story. Hercules the horse-sized dog refers to this image of a bloody massive English Mastiff being walked in the park alongside a horse. Apparently Hercules had been named the world's biggest dog by Guinness World Records, and he weighed 282 pounds at just 3 years old. Apparently his owner was shocked by his speed of growth, claiming that he fed him normal food and he continued to grow and grow and grow. There was also another photograph of this couple walking their horse and dog from behind. Can you imagine snuggling up with that? It'd break your fucking legs if it got on your lap. A lot of people claim that the image has been doctored, and I would have to agree. I mean, look at it. The name most likely comes from two places. There was a bloody massive dog named Hercules, who looks remarkably like his owner, that was apparently the world's heaviest dog. And there was a fictional dog called Hercules Morse, also an English Mastiff, who was a character in the Harry McClary books, where they would say, Hercules Morse, as big as a horse. Let's move on. On the 27th of November 1810, a woman named Mrs. Tottenham had an incredibly bizarre and somewhat frustrating day at her home at 54 Berners Street. It all began when a chimney sweep knocked on her door and claimed to have been hired to clear out the chimneys. Throughout the course of the day, Mrs. Tottenham was visited by doctors, cake makers armed with wedding cakes, men carrying an organ, the Governor of the Bank of England, the Lord Mayor of London, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and many, many more. It was properly kicking off at Mrs. Tottenham's gaff. Apparently they had to call the police out to stop people from approaching her door. So what the hell was bringing everyone there in the first place? Well, it was all thanks to a man named Theodore Hook, who is described as being a man of letters. He was an affluent academic who had enough time on his hands to write several letters to all manner of people across London, urging them to show up at Mrs. Tottenham's address. She was supposedly a well-known woman of fortune, and her house was centrally located in what is now known as the Soho area of London. I don't want to be too much of a killjoy, but I do wonder whether any of the workers that were also hoaxed by this Theodore Hook lad were actually paid for their time. The majority of people arriving at Berners Street were working class people trying to make a living, but Theodore Hook seemed to be more concerned with creating a spectacle. He'd boasted to his friend that he could make any house in London famous. And considering the fact that we're talking about it over 200 years later, I would say that unfortunately, he was right. Bear in mind that entire books have been published on this next hoax, so if you're looking for a deeper dive, then you should probably seek them out. The short story of the Automaton chess player is as follows. Inspired by illusionists, Wolfgang von Kempelen created a machine that could supposedly play chess like an absolute pro, going on to defeat notable figures such as Benjamin Franklin. An exhibition in Canada that focused on visual culture in the age of artificial intelligence wrote, dressed in Ottoman robes and a turban, von Kempelen's automaton was dubbed the casually racist moniker, the Mechanical Turk, undoubtedly with the intent to acknowledge the early adoption of chess in Persia and the Middle East. The figure sat on top of a wooden cabinet, the doors of which would open to reveal a seemingly intricate mechanism which was bloody great at playing chess. only it didn't exist. It wasn't machine operated at all. Instead, a highly skilled and concealed chess player would operate it manually from the inside. Plenty of people fell for it, and some made up quite bizarre theories about how the machine operated.
One of the biggest fictions that has arisen around it was actually perpetrated by no less than Robert Houdin. In his memoirs, he claimed that this automaton was made in order to conceal a legless Polish warrior. This unfortunate man called Waruski had had his legs shattered with a cannon, and that was the modus operandi.
Pass the dutchie on the left hand side. Pass the dutchie on the left hand side.
If you were a left-handed burger lover on April 1st, 1998, then Burger King had you covered. They took out an entire page in USA Today to advertise their new left-handed Whopper. It had been rotated a full 180 degrees to ensure better grip on the bun, maximising your taste enjoyment. They also claimed to have rearranged the orientation of the condiments, and the lower bun had been realigned to compensate for a shift in weight. Burger King spokeswoman Kim Miller said that customers had been coming into restaurants and asking for the left-handed burger, although it wasn't clear whether they were just playing along with the hoax themselves. That's it. That's all I've got on the left-handed Whopper. On to the next one. Way back in 1990, Microsoft developed a font called Wingdings, and I'm sure most of you watching this are familiar with it. It contains lots of different symbols, including books, smiley faces, religious symbols, numbers, arrows, etc. But of interest to us is the insane theory that Wingdings predicted 9/11. This theory got started via email, and if you're old enough, you probably remember the days of chain emails containing all kinds of bizarre stories, as well as threats like, if you don't forward this to 10 people, something terrible will happen to you. And I don't know about you, but I always forwarded. It's not worth the risk not to do it. Anyway, post 9/11, strange emails began to circulate. They claimed that if you typed Q33NY in Wingdings, then you'd be confronted with a plane going into 2 towers, a skull and crossbones, and the Star of David. But why Q33NY? According to the hoax creators, whoever they were, Q33NY was the flight number of one of the planes that hit the World Trade Center. Only it wasn't. Those flight numbers were AA11 and UA175. There is, however, a bus called the Q33 in New York, which runs between Jackson Heights and East Elmhurst. But I don't think it has any relation to the World Trade Center, considering the fact that both of those places are in Queens. Q33NY appears to have no relation to 9/11 whatsoever. So it's basically someone who wanted to put those symbols together and found a way to do it by lying about the flight number. That's literally it. And we all know that the only credible 9/11 prediction, apart from, all of the official ones that were ignored, comes from the TV show The Lone Gunman.
Your flight's gonna make an unscheduled stop in exactly 22 minutes.
Corner of Liberty and Washington. Lower Manhattan.
World Trade Center. I'm going to crash the plane into the World Trade Center.
I don't know about you, but I'm convinced.
Having my baby.
The website malepregnancy.com first surfaced in 1999. It supposedly documented a man named Li Mingwei who wanted to become pregnant and who declared himself the first biological male pregnancy. Alongside the website was this short documentary.
There's a lot of questions in my mind because I'm going to be the first male to carry a baby to term if I survived. I can feel the baby, actually. Yeah, it's 4 months old, and I can feel he or she kicking.
In reality, the website and the documentary was a hoax created by 2 artists, one being the real Ling Min-wei, who wasn't pregnant, and the other being Virgil Wong. He described it as an art installation, and today describes himself as an artist and digital technologist transforming human health. One person threatened to bomb Lee's house in response to the project, and he claimed that the website had been found by a religious group that had riled up their followers, leading to several other threats. Eventually, Lee had to leave his home because of it. He would later say that he was happy with the discussion that his work had sparked, despite having to fear for his life because of it. In the summer of 2003, a website called Hunting for Bambi appeared online. And before we get into it, I'm just giving you a warning for misogyny, simulated violence against women. You get my drift. Just be aware before you go any further. This website advertised a video that claimed to be more shocking than anything you've ever seen before. A cross between Fear Factor and Jackass that adds a new meaning to the phrase girls gone wild and makes bum fights look like kids play. I mean, we're dealing with some really nice stuff here. The video itself was essentially simulated violence against women. It claimed to show willing women being hunted and shot with paintball guns. But that wasn't all they offered.
A local Las Vegas business is creating quite a stir. The company is called Hunting for Bambi, and it promotes a paintball event in the desert where naked women are the targets.
That is lovely. I mean, can you imagine the sickos signing up for that kind of event? I don't even want to think about it. Their later website is so grotesque that I really don't want to show it to you, but it includes pictures of naked, terrified women, extreme levels of misogyny and violence, advocating taking revenge on the women in your life that may have wronged you, and whining about feminist killjoys. But it turns out that there were never actually any real hunts, and that the entire thing was designed to sell more copies of the original video. In 2003, the promoter of the site, Michael Burdick, was faced with charges for operating a business without a license, and he allegedly told the assistant city attorney that the entire thing was a scam to make money off the video. He also ended up apologizing for embarrassing the city of Las Vegas. That's how bad it was. He had to apologise to Las Vegas, of all places. Imagine that. That's when you know you're a real sicko, when you got to apologise to Vegas. Born in Australia in 1832, Elizabeth Reed Cotton, later known as Lady Hope, was a somewhat well-known British evangelist who participated in the temperance movement. She was very much against the booze. She's most well known for making up a story about meeting Charles Darwin on his deathbed, where she claimed that he was reading a Bible and that he told her that he regretted expressing his theory of evolution. Her story was printed in the Boston Watchman Examiner, and it circulated heavily in religious circles. Here was Charles Darwin reverting to Christianity and renouncing evolution. It was pretty sensational stuff, except it never happened. Darwin's daughter, Henrietta, said that she was the one present at his deathbed and that Lady Hope was not present at all during his last illness. His family members claimed that he never recanted any of his views and that he never converted on his deathbed. He remained an agnostic. The story is still believed by a very small number of modern creationists, but the majority of them seem to accept that Lady Hope was full of shit. In August 2015, some residents of the state of Wisconsin received a bizarre letter from the Department of Natural Resources. It asked them to remove any concrete deer ornaments from their lawn by November 1st, because the DNR will be conducting a statewide deer count, and over the past 2 years, some of the concrete deers had been counted by mistake. Some people contacted the DNR to ask if it was real, which prompted them to post on Facebook that the letter was a hoax, and that they were absolutely not trying to interfere with the residents' God-given right to cover their lawns with concrete deer statues.
Falling occupants of interplanetary craft.
We finally made it to what is quite possibly my favourite entry on this entire tier, that being the Wiesbaden Martian. Now, if you're familiar with me and the channel, then you'll be well aware of both my fondness and frustration with the world of ufology. The characters involved, the seemingly endless military psyops, so on and so forth. And you might also recognise some of the names that will appear in this story. It concerns this photograph of 2 American soldiers supposedly holding a Martian, aka an alien. The photograph appeared in April 1st, 1950 and was supposedly intended as an April Fool's Day hoax. But here's where things get a little weird. The man behind this hoax was William Sprunkle. a journalist at the local newspaper in Wiesbaden. And post-World War II, the city itself has been a constant host to the US military. It's the capital of Hesse, which became an important location of NATO installations in the 1950s, especially military bases of the US V Corps and the United States Army Europe. Sprunkel decided to contact a liaison officer at the Wiesbaden Army base, hoping to enlist them in his April Fool's Day prank. Now, you think that this kind of thing would be dismissed outright, but apparently the whole thing was approved by the US Army headquarters in Heidelberg. The liaison officer had sought out higher approval and received it. Sprunkel brought his photographer along to the base, along with his photographer's child, and this child was photographed with 2 American soldiers. Allegedly, Hans then doctored the photograph to make his own son look like an alien. He also created fake photographs of supposedly crashed flying saucers, both of which were used in the resulting piece that was published in the newspaper on April Fool's Day 1950. The story was a classic UFO crash, but in 1950, stories of crashed flying saucers were nowhere near as prominent as they are now. Apparently, Sprunkel had been inspired by the story of Ray Dimmick, who claimed to have seen a flying saucer crash in Mexico City in early March of that year. Anyway, in the Wiesbaden newspaper, they claimed the following.
A huge flying disc flew over Wiesbaden and crashed in a nearby wood. The population should remain confident about the matter, since the crew member was in a safe place at the Nuremberg hospital in the city. The alien, who would float on a rotary disc, was walked around near the hospital every day between 2 and 3 p.m. so that he gets used to our gravity, and the breathing apparatus was furnished by the military.
The whole thing should have been forgotten about, but in May 1950, an FBI agent in New Orleans named John Quinn allegedly received the photograph from an unknown informant. This unnamed person claimed that it showed a man from Mars in the United States, and he claimed to have bought the photograph for a measly $1. Now, for some reason, this photograph was held onto, and then it was subsequently released to UFO researcher Barry Greenwood after he filed a Freedom of Information Act request in 1979. Somehow, this photograph reached Bill Moore and Charles Berlitz, who at the time were working on their infamous book, The Roswell Incident, which would kickstart decades of disinformation and debate around crashed flying saucer retrievals. They published a terrible photocopy of the image along with an artist's interpretation, and given the popularity of the Roswell Incident book and the credulousness of many involved in UFO research, a lot of people believed it to be real. But here's the thing that raises some red flags for me. That story I told you about John Quinn, the FBI agent, well, that comes from Moore and Berlitz's book. I can't actually find another source for it. Bill Moore was famously involved in a disinformation campaign alongside AFOSI agent Rick Doty, targeting UFO researchers such as Paul Bennewitz, so he's not exactly a trustworthy source, at least not in some people's eyes, although he has attained somewhat of a legend status within ufology. Now, why would the FBI keep the photograph and pass it on to UFO researcher Barry Greenwood? It was a very clear hoax. What would be the purpose of releasing it to a UFO researcher in 1979, 1 year before the book on the Roswell incident was published, a book which catapulted the Roswell story into the mainstream? And if we go back to 1950, why would US Army officials approve a hoax like that in the first place? These are all important questions to ponder, but if you're looking for the answers, I sadly have none. We're ending this video with another April Fool's Day hoax, this one from a 1972 issue of the Veterinary Record, which seems like an unusual place for a hoax. They published an article about the diseases of Brunus Edwardii, and they claimed that this was a species that was commonly kept in homes in the UK, Europe and North America. The images accompanying the article showed a teddy bear suffering from loss of limbs, emotional disturbances and a lopsided squint. It was a supposed scientific paper about diseases amongst teddy bears. Apparently some people fell for this, which is insane to think about, but I'll be real with you, That picture of that bear suffering from emotional disturbance is genuinely heartbreaking. I honestly feel upset looking at it. That concludes the 5th tier on the Hoaxes Iceberg, and I think it's been quite a fun and varied one. As always, thanks for watching, and also thank you to all of my patrons. Your continued support allows me to carry on making these videos, and I'm so grateful. And I will see you in the next video, which will be the second to last tier on this iceberg. Bye!